Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
So now we can see our audience. Thanks. Yeah, nice you had the opportunity to help us a little bit with a view from the south. Yeah, we are a little bit too late. I'm sorry, but I hope there's still. You have your subject. Now we talked about Stefan Hohenhuber talked about the global perspective of the Sustainable Development Goals and the possibility by parallel currency. And Christian Gelleri just now introduced a little bit the perspective from the bottom and already mentioned your action in together with the Chiemgauer financing this small village project. So I give you the word, and I hope we can understand everything and and can ask you some questions afterwards. Thank you.
Cheers. Okay. Hi, everyone. Well, if you've already heard from Christian, I'm sure you've heard a lot of really good stuff already. I kind of I'll start a little bit with my background and kind of how I got into this stuff. And essentially, I about 20 years ago, I was a physicist, and I got kind of pulled into what was called econophysics at the time, and it was using agent-based modeling to do some, basically simulations between economic agents. And I very quickly kind of abandoned physics, and I thought this was the most exciting thing in the world. And it wasn't long after that I found Bernard Leotar's book, and so I had been playing with kind of foreign exchange models and things like this. And then I heard about this world of community currencies and got very, very excited about the whole concept. And so I spent quite a lot of time studying them around the U.S. and Europe, and so got into the whole kind of Let's movement early on. And I was working with the Community Forge guys there in Switzerland for a little while, and there was this kind of just general notion that communities could kind of empower themselves and create their own economies. And I had also been kind of always an activist in the realm of development, and there was an opportunity for me to go and stay in Kenya, and I took that, and it was to me like the stories that we had been told of community currencies being really successful, like the Wargle and kind of post-World War, post-Depression currencies, was always about some state of a lot of excess capacity, and that people could or a state or a municipality could create a currency and create a huge amount of economic activity and community resilience. And to me, I thought that was a good description in a way of a lot of places in Kenya, for instance, where I ended up, where there's huge amounts of kind of cyclical problems, but there's a huge amount of potential of capacity of people to trade with each other. And the idea of being able to introduce a medium of exchange there that could circulate in those areas, it sounded like that would be the perfect way to do that. And so I started in the slums back in 2010 with a currency called EcoPesa, and it was a model similar to kind of Berkshire's to some degree. This sort of like donors could come in and back the currency, and there could be activities, and then those activities would enable a local currency to stay circulating in that community, and then there would be a slow kind of buy off of that currency, which is in some ways very similar to how kind of cash and voucher assistance works now with aid programs. There's been a lot of move over the last 5 years into cash transfer programming, or cash and voucher assistance programming. And I'll try to kind of backstop that again. After that program, I got really excited about the idea of just saying, well, let's try to do this without any donor funds. And so the next program we did, we basically used it just as a pure kind of like a mutual credit, in a sense. Like every business in an entire region of a slum got about $4 worth of these bills denominated in local currency. In this case, there was no backing whatsoever, other than this sort of social backing, sort of a social credit, with sort of local forms of guarantees in terms of like you'd have to be guaranteed by 4 other businesses to join the network, and there was some kind of judiciary process around people kind of deciding not to accept them anymore, but it was all done by the community themselves, and that took off quite well. Very quickly we had up to 200 businesses that were circulating these, and these little vouchers were going everywhere. Actually, Christian helped us with the paper for these from Chiemgauer. And so like this 20 shilling note, it's got some serial numbers on there. We were measuring trading hands about twice a day, and the idea was that one piece of paper was producing about 700 more meals after it circulated for about a year. And so that was really, really exciting. The Kenyan government was not very excited about it, and they decided to kind of put us all in jail, and that ended up being a 6-month kind of court process where eventually the Attorney General basically said there's no law being broken by these programs whatsoever. And so we were given a full kind of clean bill of health, and we continued expanding after that. There was more and more programs in different slums around Kenya. Eventually we started working in more rural areas as well, and I found a huge difference there, in terms of what to do and not to do in these different kind of contexts, and how rural communities kind of different from urban communities, and a lot of it goes into this idea of like bootstrapping. To create a currency, it's one of those things that doesn't work if only one person agrees to it, right? And the whole idea of creating social backing for these things, in a place where it's really hard to litigate is kind of a mixed bag. Like you go into a place like a slum where there might be areas where they don't speak the same language, neighbors don't necessarily like each other. There's a lot of rural to urban migration, and so it's not a very full trustful environment to begin with. And then versus in rural areas, you end up with, it can be a very trusted environments where people are, like there's much more established kind of hierarchy, and as long as you are working with the village elders and the chief and they all agree to it, there can be kind of a lot of consensus building. So, I mean, where we are kind of in a nutshell right now is we've got about 6,000 small businesses, from schools down to women selling vegetables on the side of the road. They've been trading about $120,000 worth of currency just this last year, and they've all been issued about 400 shillings, which is about $4 of these currencies, and that is by and large backed by social collateral, social businesses and cooperatives that are agreeing to accept it. There's always this kind of sense of hub and backer of last resort, or kind of employer of last resort. That's super important. And to make those backers of last resort really functional and make them work, it's taken us a lot of effort to go in and explain these concepts in certain ways. And what's been happening in the last about 6 months is that we've been working a lot with Catholic Relief Services and working with what are called chamas in Kenya, which are essentially small savings and loan groups where they save together, they loan out to each other, they charge fees, but the fees go back to the members at the end of the year. So it's kind of like a non-extractive banking process. And there's a lot of these, similar, like in France, maybe tontines, these kind of roscas in South America. And so we've been working a lot more with those groups, and they've been kind of adopting the currencies more as kind of a bank would, in a sense, right? They actually want to be able to create more credit in their community, and so they're kind of a natural issuer, if you will, versus a cooperative or a small business or networks of small businesses. They're not really geared up that way. They don't have a lot of the sort of the background, and it takes a lot of work for us to get them to the point of being kind of currency issuers and managers. But working with these groups themselves has been really much more effective. And we've been moving everything now. These 6,000 people I'm talking about right now, they're all using the blockchain as well. So we've moved off paper currencies almost completely in Kenya. There's maybe 10% or so still in circulation. It's all done on what are called layer 2 blockchains, which are they use the mainnets, but they're very for security, but they're very, very fast. We just have 20 nodes in the network, which is enough to do face-to-face transactions. So people are using feature phones, little button phones. They dial a little USSD code. It gives them a menu. And that menu is basically send, look at my balance, marketplace, so they can market, they can say what are the offers and wants in the community. And that's about it. There's a pin, for their secret code, essentially. And we take that information when they want to do a transaction, we push it onto the blockchain, and we watch the blockchain. So the blockchain is basically our data engine. We used to use Cyclos for a little while as the back end with the feature phones, and we basically just pulled that out and replaced it with the blockchain itself, which had all the same functionality of acting as basically a transaction engine. And then what's even kind of more exciting is that there's the ability on the blockchain to say, well, how do we connect all these currencies together? Because we've created about 12 right now, and probably by the end of this year, we're going to have about 40. And the reason for that is that these, so far what we've been doing is manually going to a community and basically saying, hey guys, we're going to create this currency, let's do it together. And we would create essentially like a regional currency, based on, like, let's say political units, of like the name of the area, for instance. And we would call that the community currency. And what we're moving towards is actually, we want to essentially kind of wipe all of that we've done and essentially start over in the next few months and really have it on the interface where the community itself can actually now create their own currency. And what's kind of cool about this is that as they do that on the blockchain, so they can own that token essentially that they create, they can also pay collateral to it as well. And so we're using right now as a stable coin called DAI, and this is sort of, I think what's exciting about this movement maybe over the next few years is really to talk about what are the reserves, what is a potential reserve, because what the concept of reserve gives us is the ability to link all these currencies together now, right? So every single currency is based on what we call in economics a bonding curve, essentially. So the amount of reserve they have in right now DAI, which is essentially Kenyan shillings, right? They have a reserve in national currency that gives people a guarantee. So when they're holding one of these, notes, when now it's digital, they actually have a guarantee. There's sort of a buyer of last resort, if you will, right? And that is that collateral fund. And what happens is as that collateral starts to leak out, their exchange rate out to the shilling, so there is an exchange rate to the shilling at this point, actually starts to drop. And as these savings groups are saving more and more into their own reserves, the value of these starts to go up. So actually, it's not a stable currency anymore. It's stable only by market effect. And that's been a really, really interesting thing going on. There's a lot of, there's a lot of social peg that keeps it stable because these are generally mixed pricing. So like for 100 shillings item, you're paying, let's say, 80 shillings plus 20 of these. This is really, really common there. And so there's a lot of businesses like these merry-go-rounds, these savings groups they're always accepting them on value with the Kenyan shilling. And so there's this sort of arbitrage kind of opportunity that actually creates a stability mechanism between these. And so you have, right now in Kenya, we've got about 12 currencies. They're all tradable with each other, and they're all balancing around each other. So they all start one-to-one in terms of value. But as one starts to buy more from the other, what happens is, like, if this currency is essentially buying from this currency, it's moving some of its reserve over to that other currency, right? So if I'm buying tomatoes from this group, I'm going to move some reserve. My value of this one goes down. The value of this one goes up relative to each other. This community has a price advantage to buy from the other one. And so it's a really nice, very, very simple mechanism to sort of, you're basically taking trade imbalance between the communities as well as imbalance to a collateral, and you're mapping that onto price, exchange price, relative to the currencies as well as relative to an exchange out to shillings. The probably biggest news right now is that we've just got an exciting kind of opportunity with Red Cross, and some of the other larger development agencies like Oxfam and UNICEF are very interested in this, but Red Cross is really pushing forward in terms of looking at is there a way that they can change how they do cash transfer programming, globally? And so there's a grant called Innovation Norway that Red Cross actually just won to further develop kind of an open source platform for these concepts and really, like properly pilot test these in, dozens of sites and do feasibility studies and whatnot. And GIZ's also been involved as well. And so there's a lot of interest in these. I mean, there's also a lot of acknowledgement from the aid industry that cash transfer, while it might be better than traditional aid, because traditional aid was just extremely horrible in a lot of ways, like, 80% of it gets lost anyways. And the idea of just dumping cash on communities was better than that. They've also acknowledged that that's not really sustainable, and it's essentially kind of random. We can't really airdrop cash around the whole world. So if there's a way to create endogenous money or local money that outlasts these programs. So, the idea is that Red Cross may come into a site that's experiencing some real issues. They may still dump cash on that community, but if the form of cash is an e-voucher that is essentially a Kenyan shilling on the blockchain, well, that can be leveraged essentially. That can be held and used as a collateral for a local currency, right? So the source of the local currency in this case is kind of an airdropped seed capital or an airdropped collateral from Red Cross. And communities are able to also add to that themselves. So they own it completely. So they take that seed collateral, they create their credit around it. And to be honest, this is essentially what kind of banks do in general, right? So we're essentially allowing communities to do fractional reserve. The way we're regulating it is much more stringent than banking policy, right? We know exactly how much reserve is always on their blockchain, and in the smart contract itself, we're automatically adjusting the price of their token. So, if Wells Fargo is over issuing credit, or Chase, we've had 4 banks collapse in the last few years in Kenya by over issuing credit, right? If you knew exactly how much credit to reserve they had at any moment, you could actually say what is the value of their credit that's being issued. So you wouldn't call it shillings, right? You would call it their own credit that has a value in shillings, right? Based on actually some real metrics. And so I think maybe that's probably a good enough kind of nutshell that I can say in 15 minutes here. And maybe I just kind of open it up to some questions. And
thank you, Will. Yes. It's really a great overview of your really very interesting work you do in that not so easy region. So let's maybe we can have 1 or 2 questions. We are a bit short on time, but still maybe somebody likes to ask something. Yeah, start with
Thank you.
with you.
Well, thanks again, and it was very interesting to hear. My question is actually, if you are connecting and working together with the Eco-Village movement in Kenya or with the Eco-Village project Otepic?
no,
You have no connection.
I know. I don't even know what they are. There's so many groups in Kenya. It's really a challenge. So I'm really happy to connect with any groups. And the goal of our organization right now is all of the tech we're really trying to push out into open source and get other organizations to work on that. And the core of what we're doing is called grassroots economics, is just the training modules and just going to other organizations and setting them up to be able to do these things themselves. So we've got a staff of about 5 people for all of Kenya right now, and really it's a matter of going out and training and making sure that those groups are self-sufficient. So happy to connect with any of those groups and try to get them up to speed and using these systems. And again, we're still by the end of November, we'll be in this phase where it'll be very, very, very simple for those groups to sort of just either copy the software themselves, because it's very open source, or just piggyback on what we're doing. There's another organization called Sempo. You can look up their website. Sempo.ai is pulling a lot of our USSD code into this sort of open source module. So USSD is the feature phone system. So so no, but I'm happy to connect.
Thank you.
Hello? Yeah.
I just wanted to try to also ask this. Yeah.
Yeah. One more question. Yeah, two more questions.
I don't know if you can hear me, but if I understood right, he was using also saving groups and created local currency for them. If you could just explain that in a couple of words.
About saving groups that made you integrated the saving groups in a new currency.
So the whole idea with savings groups is that they essentially take some of that capital that they're saving, they lock it or stake it, if you will, or lock it into a contract. So right, they put it on chain first of all. So like let's say their savings is in Kenyan shillings, that needs to be converted either via e-money or some third party process into, in Kenya it's via M-Pesa, right? So they have M-Pesa, they convert that into DAI. That DAI which is a stable coin, is held into a contract, and then that contract at the same time creates a credit around that. And we're using 25% as our sort of standard right now as our reserve ratio. So we create 4x that credit, right? So for, let's say, 10,000 shillings of collateral, right, of reserve, they create 40,000 shillings of supply of credit, right? Those two are one-to-one with each other. So if the very first shilling you pull out, let's say they're pulling out their reserve, so their credit is claims against that reserve. Okay, so this is essentially fractional reserve, but it's done in a way called using bonding curves, essentially. So what happens is that the community has this credit now of 40,000 shillings that they are loaning out to their members. They're using it within the community. It gets dispersed in quite a few ways in the community. Everyone holding those has a claim, right? It's a fractionalized claim against some actual collateral. There's also all the social collateral, right? So we haven't gotten rid of that. We're just backstopping it. In a way, we found so many traffic jams with social collateral that to make these things really expand beyond, a few hundred businesses and get mid-sized businesses involved, there had to be some sort of on and off ramping. And so to say that we're backing it in Tomato socially, well, we're also able to back it now using the blockchain with actual collateral that is guaranteed, right? And so that's basically it. So imagine, like a microfinance needs access. These are very similar to like a microfinance. You're giving these small community groups that are doing savings already with each other the ability to create a credit, right? And you're basically saying you're going to take that money and you're putting it into something like in the US we'd call it a CD, which is sort of like a slow instrument, right? So we're slowing down that collateral. We're taking your reserve, you're putting it in, you're locking it into a contract. It can only be removed very slowly. And so we actually limit it to 10% a week can be removed from that collateral, right? So you've taken some Kenyan shillings, you're holding it into a pool, you're slowly letting it withdraw, while at the same time you have a basket of credit, right? That can move very, very quickly in the community and move around. It can also move into other communities and whatnot. Yeah, does that answer your question?
You understand right that the savings are used to give credits to the community. So that with the excess cash they have, they use it for the communities.
Yes, and we're getting Red Cross to add this concept of like seed funds into their cash transfer programming. So when a donor wants to come in and support a community, they have a new option. That new option is, well, everyone has a wallet now. You could donate directly to anyone in the community, but you could also give the community more seed capital, essentially, right? Which is actually, not a very uncommon development practice with like microfinances and things like that. So we're just allowing very, very small. Usually this is a group of like 25 women that are saving $2 a week each.
Very good. So very last question, huh? And then we have to have a break. Okay, just
Geht schnell die Kamera um, dass sieht, wer ist.
I wonder, I've got several questions. Sorry. One of those is, you said that you're also collaborating with Kenyan authorities, and I wondered how come that they accept your project, because obviously it undermines the confidence in the Kenyan shilling, and hence the ability of the central bank to conduct monetary policies. And then how do you think your project supports like Kenyan or local economies facing like problems like foreign exchange, for example, which is like necessary for the imports of petrol and hence also decisive when it comes down to the inflation of foodstuff? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So with the first one, look, we're essentially establishing these credits right now with Kenyan shillings as the reserve, which is exactly what private banks do, right? So we're basically giving little community groups the tools of private banks. Really, the central bank should like that. And we're regulating them much, much stricter than a private bank would be. And they're self-regulated on the blockchain itself, and all the transactions are transparent, right? And so, you know, to me, this is where the entire banking system actually should be going. You know, that we should change how fractional reserve works and really put real regulations on it. And there's really no excuse in the next few years of why the government wouldn't be moving to blockchain anyways. So, and we've been actually having talks with them. They have like a blockchain task force now, and you know, they want to be, you know, seen as progressive and all this kind of stuff. So. When they took us to jail, you know, years ago, it was quite embarrassing for them because, you know, obviously there was no scam going on. There was no one's losing any money out of these systems, and they were seen as essentially, you know, there was news and everything going like, why would you stop this woman from trading her tomatoes for school fees? So we're dealing with a sector of population that is incredibly underserved, right? They don't even have cash for a lot of the year, and so their markets are stagnating all the time. So the government's not really doing much of their job in that sense anyway. So you know, what's going to be interesting now is how will private banks react, right? Because we're sort of stepping on their turf to some degree. You know, will private banks, you know, want to come in and sort of use these types of systems in the future? And you know, if we can move regulation in that direction, I think it's a huge win. I mean, when we get to the point where the central bank comes in and says we need to really start regulating this stuff, well, I'm happy about that. I think we've actually almost won at that point if we can get that to happen. You know, if they come in and just like try to kill us and get us out of the country, that would really suck, right? But if they start regulating us like that, that's actually a big win to me. I mean, it could go in a bad way, but you know, if we have 5,000 sites with Red Cross using these things every day, and you can transparently see people are paying school fees with them and health insurance, you know, paying for their health bills and all these kinds of things, I think it's going to be very hard. And Kenya, you know, even if it doesn't work in Kenya, we're also doing all sorts of work to set up in Ethiopia and Cameroon and quite a few other countries right now too. So, and a lot of them, you know, like have governments that are maybe a little bit more open to innovation in some ways. I mean, Kenya has been very open to innovation, but they're sort of like saying, okay, that was enough innovation. Now we need to stop, you know.
Okay, thank you very much, Bill. It was a real pleasure to have you here, and I think we have a lot of material now, and I also think we can contact you in case we want to know something more. I can contact you and transmit some things. So thanks a lot. And have a really good time. I will talk to you later on tomorrow also for all.
Great. Okay. Have a great day, guys. All right. Bye, John. Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye. Bye.